What's up, everybody? Welcome in to a winning edition of SSPN Postgame. The Spurs beat the Sacramento Kings at home 116-96 tonight, a 20-point win. That was a big bounce back win after Saturday's heartbreaking loss to the Utah Jazz. Ethan, I'll dish it to you. Obviously, we're probably going to go through this thing in depth, talk about, all the different stat lines, a crazy one from Wemby. Stephon Castle had a really good game. Sandro Mamukelashvili showing out, hitting some timely threes. But what were your overall thoughts on this one?
Lots of improvements. I would say the key points were better spacing, much improved space, which kind of comes from the defense to offense transition game that was finally working, especially in that second half when we seemed to turn up the defensive intensity to 11, if you will. And in the second half, also limiting turnovers. It was a problem in the first half. It was a very close game in the first half, but we were able to make some strides in that area in the second half and eventually win by 20. And it always helps when Wembanyama hits threes. But we were just talking before the show started, Jude, for us to be able to acquire a lead and then not only maintain it, but expand it for the entirety of that second half is a rarity for us as Spurs fans in the last couple of years. So we were both kind of like in shock a little bit there. Like, wow, we didn't at any point blow this game or make it feel like we were about to blow this game.
And, when you mention that, it's so funny. In the fourth quarter, one of the things that I have written down, one of the few things I have written down is, right when it was about 12-10 and the Kings could have cut it to a 10-point game with, I believe, around like 4 minutes left or so. And then it's like, oh my gosh, here we go again. Is this going to be just like last year? Or even the Los Angeles Clippers game last Monday? Is that going to be the same story? Is this going to be another big lead that's blown? Right. And you had, I believe right around then, you had a huge little time eater, is what I called it, CP3 pick and pop with Victor. And that put it back up to 15 and, kind of smooth sailing there at the end. But it was like you said, you jump out with that 24-16 lead in the third quarter. And, you're wondering, okay, like, are we going to be able to maintain this? Even if we do pull this out, is this going to be, a single digit game within 5 by the time that we're in, the last minute of the game? We've seen that before, but they just kept that double digit lead, like you said, cleaned up the turnovers and really just kept control of all the momentum and the game after that stellar start in the third quarter.
Yeah, actually, I think we should mention it was actually the end of the second quarter where that run actually started. We actually ended that quarter on a 7-0 run, which was huge. We won that quarter 38-29 as well.
Yeah, and when you talk about the CP3 buzzer beater, obviously that's a ton of momentum. But just to go into the half with a 5-point lead, despite losing the turnover battle, that was a huge thing for sure. But you ready to get into the game flow of this thing?
Let's do it.
All right, I'm going to dish it to you for the first quarter. Sacramento wins 26-22. What did you see at the beginning of the game?
So, again, keeping with my theme of just broader notes here, I'll let Jude get into the nitty gritty here in a second. But decisive passing, but Steph Castle had 2 very quick turnovers back to back, which led to Sacramento buckets. Harrison was aggressive early, which I thought was interesting. He was actually like a funnel. We ran our offense through him for the first few possessions in the post as well. Steph hit a huge 3, but overall the offense on the bench was very stagnant. We were really having difficulty creating any offense despite Devin coming into the game with about 5 minutes left in the quarter. There was a lot of miscommunication, a lot of miscues as far as passing. Turnovers were an issue. And then defensively, I felt like we were playing good defense, but when you can't score, there's only so much that you can do. Like, we were able to limit Sacramento 26, but we were only able to score 22. And again, my last note was just turnovers. Continue to be an issue.
Yeah, that was really how I felt even midway through the quarter, Ethan. One of the things that I had written down was 4-0 in the turnover battle, just off rip. Yeah. One thing that I did notice that was good from the beginning of the game, and this is something that continued throughout the rest, was there was an emphasis on getting Wemby the ball You
Yeah.
mentioned decisive passing. You saw that in other areas too, but there was also, it ties into intention. Not to always harp on this word intentional, whether it was intentional off ball movement that you
Mm.
saw throughout the game, or intentional swing passes, like, a pass that they know, okay, I'm going to hit him here, and then this is going to lead to something else. There was a purpose, to everything. And, getting the ball to Wemby in the post, whether that was through two passes or just Chris Paul putting it in the right place where it needed to be, that decisive passing you mentioned, you could definitely see from the beginning. But it definitely wasn't the prettiest quarter, like you said, had a ton of turnovers. And that was really, the reason at the end of the day that we ended up losing that quarter by 4.
Yep. Agreed.
But I like the point that you harped on about the defense, because I think that was something that stood out a lot tonight. I do want to take into account that Sacramento got in after a back-to-back at 3:00 in the morning.
Mm.
But I also think that our on-ball defense overall tonight was really some of the best that I've seen this season.
For sure, especially against individuals. I thought the way we were able to defend Kevin Herter was actually the biggest point defensively. Like, sure, De'Aaron Fox minus 21, the box score only 24 points. DeRozan only 21 points, right? But these guys are going to get their numbers. But Kevin Herter is the flamethrower that could really hurt you. And he went 0 for 5 from 3, 1 for 7 from the field. We weren't biting at pump fakes. We were staying grounded, other than a couple against DeMar DeRozan, but that's to be expected.
Yeah, I mean, outside, I got the box score pulled up here. Outside of Sabonis, DeRozan, and De'Aaron Fox, and even with those guys, you force them to miss, shoot at least close to 50%. Wasn't just like every single thing was going in. But look, Keegan Murray, 2 for 7. Kevin Herter, 1 for 7, 0 for 5 from 3. Trey Lyles, 3 for 8. Doug McDermott, 2 for 6. Jordan McLaughlin, 2 for 4. Keon Ellis, that's somebody who's gone off for them before in a lot of games. 1 for 5 from 3, 1 for 6 overall. And meanwhile, when you go down to our box score, Ethan, you've got 13 from Champagnie, 10 from Harrison Barnes, 12 from Chris Paul, 10 from Stephon Castle, 11 from Keldon, 12 from Devin. So on top of obviously Victor's monster game, an insane stat line that we will get to. This is like the type of stuff that, we were expecting from Victor this season, even more of a jump from last year, at least on the box score. But yeah, honestly, I think you kind of summed up that first quarter there. There's some other stuff that I could say, but I think the main thing was, played some pretty solid defense, but the turnovers once again stifled everything offensively. But moving into the second quarter, Ethan, the Spurs won 38-29. I'll go ahead and jump into my notes on this one and then dish it back to you a little bit. One thing that I noticed throughout this game, and this is the first thing I have written down in the second quarter, after there was an open 3 and a turnover to start the game, Mitch Johnson immediately called a timeout. You saw that a couple times throughout the game at critical points. So I liked those, and we usually bounced back out of those timeouts. We didn't let that fester and continue. We just nipped it in the butt and addressed it. KJ was able to hit some shots early in this quarter, showing a lot of touch, in traffic to get the ball, kind of little floaters over people's heads. Sean Elliott was talking about that. Mamu, even from the jump, I have it written down in the second quarter. I'm not exactly sure what his final rebound total was, but he was fighting a lot on the boards and creating extra possessions for us. Whether he got accredited with the rebound or not, there was a lot of effort that you saw from Mamu getting his hands in there and at least impacting, us having potential extra possessions and trying a lot, kind of, especially with Jeremy out, kind of trying to embody that role to an extent. Obviously, he's not the same player as Jeremy. And obviously there's some things that he can do that Jeremy can't do as well. But still, I like to see him trying to impose his will on the offensive boards. We were even, another thing I have written down, KJ, good defense on a DeMar mid-range shot. Again, DeMar still got his, but still had 7 misses on the night as well. And there were a lot of guys that I saw that just had solid on-ball defense on guys. Stephon Castle forced a couple air balls on De'Aaron Fox. Obviously, Victor is going to do what he's going to do with all of his blocks and the way that he was able to guard Sabonis. But like you said, how you harped on individually, that's exactly what I was getting at. The individual on-ball defense, which when you think about the Kings, obviously they still have some ball movement, but really it is kind of like these shooters playing off of DeMar DeRozan or De'Aaron Fox or even Sabonis for that matter when he takes it up the floor at times. So to be able to play better on-ball defense in those isolation situations, I think was huge against a team like the Kings, if that makes sense. Um, Wemby was eating on the glass. I saw a lot of extra passes from Keldon Johnson tonight. There's a lot of written about him here in the second quarter. We had this lineup. I think this was to end the quarter when you talked about that 7-0 run. We had CP3, Devin, Stephon Castle, Harrison Barnes, and Wemby on the floor. I was excited to see both Devin and Stephon Castle on the floor together. And here's the last thing I'll say, other than the CP3 buzzer beater in the second quarter, Zach Collins. Again, if you look at the box score, it's not going to look like anything crazy. But in the second quarter, this was big. He hit a three that was wide open, and then he got a block, which led to an open transition three for Julian Champagnie. I don't really care what the box score says. I don't think Zach Collins played a bad game tonight.
I don't think he did either. I think he was only beaten a couple of times by Sabonis, but he made Sabonis work. He was physical on the inside. He did get that one block, and he knocked down the 1-3 that he took. So I'm completely happy if he's able to do this every single night of the season. But I think you summarized this quarter really well. I wrote a lot of the same things about Mamu's great energy, Keldon's off-ball movement, fighting for extra possessions, backdoor cuts from everybody. And we kind of already alluded to that with just the amount of players we had with 10 plus points. I think it was 7 guys with at least 10 points tonight, which is wonderful to see. Just to say a couple specific things, Steph Castle had a nasty hezzy in this quarter where he came to a complete stop on 1 foot and then laid it up. Disgusting Luka Doncic like stuff. And then he had a great block that led to a 2-for-1 score. No, sorry, the block was from Zach. Zach had a great block that actually led to a 2-for-1 opportunity where Steph Castle was able to score, and he was 4 of the 7 points in that 7-0 run. And then obviously Chris Paul hit the buzzer beating 3 to end the quarter. But once we're able to find this momentum and it's contagious, it's infectious, and suddenly everyone's hitting from deep. We're able to space the floor, move the ball well. And Zach Collins, with the shooting sleeve and the headband, is able to knock one down.
The shooting sleeve, it's going to continue to become a thing. If Zach can continue to hit the open threes and just, again, be like you said, marginally better, in a lot of the areas that we've talked about, whether that be post defense or even on the perimeter, the shooting sleeve is definitely going to become an item of SSPN lore for sure.
Yeah, absolutely it is. Steph's also wearing a shooting sleeve now, and his 3-point shot is also improved. 2 for 5 tonight for him.
I was putting some comments up, and just regardless of even his percentage, just the way he looks when he's taking the shot, man, it gives me a lot of confidence for where that's going to be in 3 to 4 years. Like, I know Jeremy Sohan might not be the best example of this, but again, if you go back to his rookie season and then last year, you saw like a 5 to 6 percentage point improvement. I feel like if Jeremy can do that, Stephon can do that at some point with what we've seen so far. But let's move on to the second half, man. Obviously, defense was a huge story this second half, but what were some of the things that really stood out to you in the third quarter?
Fantastic energy to start the third quarter. Great ball movement, hitting threes. I think Mamu had a couple in this quarter, finished the game 3 for 5 tonight. He was huge as far as momentum runs this game. Defense to offense. This quarter was all about transition offense. And when we're able to get out and run, we finally corrected some of the spacing issues we saw in the first couple of games where guys are running down the same lane, and we're spreading out and we're getting easy baskets at the rim or on kick out threes. And I was about to make a note, and I said I was literally about to write down, we need Devin to do something because he was absent. And this is the quarter where he finally decided to hit 2 big shots, which included an and 1 3 toward the end of the quarter. And really, I honestly felt like our bench offense was struggling. And then he had 12 points total. I don't know exactly how many were in this quarter, but once he felt like he was getting going, everybody started to get going even more. And that felt like a big catalyst in this second half momentum.
Yeah, absolutely. He went on a 7-0 run himself at that point of the game. I forget the exact score that it was at that time, but obviously it was continuing to extend the lead after I think we had built it up to 10 at one point. So I want to say probably maybe that was a part of the 7-0 run. Again, I can't remember exactly what the score was at that point, but I just remember on that second 3, I was just so happy, man, because it was total Devin ISO, which kind of from what we saw last season. And that was kind of what you saw from Devin in flashes tonight. Obviously, like you said, it didn't really happen until the second half. But still in that role, you want him to kind of be having those ISO buckets, just kind of in a similar role to what we had last year. Obviously, if he was in the starting lineup now, I don't know if that would necessarily be the case. But still, the first three that he hit in that 7-0 run was a catch and shoot.
Yep.
So it's like, that's another thing. Once he is in that starting lineup eventually, like that's still something that he can do. But to show right after that, hey, I can still just, be a possession in myself and get us 4 points, man. It just felt so good to see, because I didn't see the Jazz game on Saturday. I know he had 21, shot 50% from the field from three, and just overall. So obviously, if I wanted to go see some more Devin buckets, I could go watch those highlights, and we know that he has that in him. But still, for me, this was my first time seeing it. So that just made me really happy, not just to see Devin back out on the floor doing that, but also in the way that it was so timely in that third quarter.
Right on.
And here we go. Blazin is helping us out. He says Devin scored the 4-pointer with 2:38 left in the third. So I think we were probably already up by double digits at that point. But there was probably some scoring on the other side as well that kind of balanced it out. Because I was going to say, I don't think we got up to 20 in the third. That's why I was a little bit confused in my head. But still, that sequence from Devin Vassell was vintage Devin. And I'm just to talk about Devin a little bit, since we're on him here. I'm just excited to see him continue to learn how to play off of this team. Obviously he's been with the team for a while, but adding in Stephon, Harrison, and Chris Paul, that's still 3 new guys in the rotation. And obviously right now, we're kind of just getting him back in the swing of things. Let me see how many minutes he had tonight.
21.
21. Yeah. So I believe he's still on that 22-minute or less minutes restriction. That's what he played in Utah. He played 22 minutes. So yeah, once that minutes restriction is lifted and he's back to the starting lineup and he's really got some more reps with these guys, I'm super excited. And then again, I mean, that even makes me think about how Jeremy Sohan isn't playing right now, and it just gets me even more excited. And not to go all over the place here, Ethan, but one funny note about Jeremy that I got to say, he was wearing a Keldon Johnson chain as well as the Stephon Castle draft chain tonight on the bench. So shout out Jeremy repping both of his teammates on the bench.
I didn't notice that, but that's just typical Jeremy, isn't it?
It is. I'm like, these are, and I'm pretty sure it's like those aren't his. He just wore theirs.
He probably did. Yeah, he probably did.
Because it was like literally the one that Stephon wore on draft night. But going back to the third quarter, before Devin even had that 7-0 run, we went on a 10-0 run. There was a great fake pass from Stephon Castle earlier in the quarter that faked out a defender and then allowed Julian Champagnie to be wide open for 3 in the left quarter. That was all Stephon, just manipulating his defender. Another thing I had written down in the third quarter, on ball defense, solid to start. That's something we saw throughout the game. Wemby had a nice charge on Sabonis that he drew. Like I said, we built the lead up to 10, then we built it up to 14, and then we continued to build it. And the last thing I had written down in the third quarter was, as much as we went on some good runs in the third, defense was the key. And when you look at that score there on the third quarter in the box score, again, just 16 points, if I'm remembering correctly. Yeah. Correct. That all comes down to defense, honestly.
Defense and cleaning up the damn turnovers.
Absolutely. Let me see. And it was, what's crazy is it was still 14-7 in the turnover battle for them in the third quarter. Like, as in, they only had 7 and we had 14. But like you said, though, at the same time, most of those were in the first half. So cleaning them up in the second half, playing better defense, as well as continuing to execute on offense. It's amazing what that can do.
100%.
All right, dishing it to you for the fourth quarter. I know Sandro Mamukelashvili has a lot to do with this.
Yeah, I wrote great energy from Mamu again. I think I've written that 3 times at this point in the game, but it's true. Transition, forcing extra possessions, and then shooting threes. It's what Mamu does. And he seems to always be in the right place at the right time, Jude. He's got a great connection with Wemby. Sean was talking about that. They just always seem to find each other in the right place. Continued to happen in the fourth quarter. There was a bad pass to start the quarter from Wemby. boom, immediate timeout from Mitch Johnson, like you were talking
Yeah.
about. I love to see that kind of thing. And then as soon as we came back, it was back-to-back Mamu threes following great defense. I wrote, again, way to limit Kevin Herter. That's been key the entire game. He has not gotten going. And then there was a semi like bad run from the Spurs. I think we just took a couple early shots in the shot clock, and Sacramento got a couple transition buckets. And I just saw a 39-year-old, 6 foot tall, number 3, Chris Paul, stand up and walk toward the scores table. And I was like, all right, we're enough messing around. Mitch wants to win this game, and he came back in, and that's what, like you said, we expanded the lead to 20 points, and it was a really nice way to close the game. And I was in shock. I cannot lie, Jude.
That's kind of, I opened the post game talking about that, where I said there was a huge time eater CP3 pick and pop that led to a Wemby 3. And the reason I called that is because, like you said, once he came in the game, it was like, okay, guys, we let this get to 12. The first thing we're going to do is make sure we use all 24 seconds.
Yep.
And the second thing we're going to do is we're going to get a pick and roll or pick and pop with me or Victor in some capacity. And I'm either going to come off it and get a layup or a mid-range bucket, or I'm going to get it to Victor and he's going to take a shot as well. So that was definitely steadying the course. Blazin in the comments said that Mitch put CP3 in when the game was starting to get out of control and the Kings were building momentum. And basically what he did was he came in, settled everybody down, where last year this would have led to like 4 or 5 more turnovers, and then it's a 2-point game and then we lose. It feels like that happened so many times last season. Yep. Chris Paul coming in, steadying the ship, making sure we get good possessions, and, not only just getting the win, but like you said, even in the last couple minutes, expanding on it to really put a stamp, from 12 points all the way up to a 20-point win at 116 to 96. CP3 had a clutch floater late in the game, but here's the big thing for me. Also, we didn't even mention this. At one point in the fourth quarter, we were 50% overall from the field and 45% from three. Yeah. We ended the game 50% overall and 47% from three and 100% from the free throw line. Only 8 free throws, but still, that's probably our most efficient game offensively of the season. We were 20-9 at least at some point midway in the fourth quarter. When I wrote it down on threes, we had 20. They only had 9. Obviously, Mamu helped out a lot with that. There was a clutch Wemby midi pull-up that was reminiscent of some of the things you've been talking about for a while, where he just gets it in the post, shoot over the guy. It's usually automatic. But the last thing, and this is honestly, my biggest takeaway from the fourth quarter, Ethan, we wanted the challenge with 1 minute and 23 seconds left. And everybody was playing with that same intensity, like we were down, 5. And it was a clutch game. That was something that was completely different, than last season, and even from what I've seen so far this year.
No, for sure. That level of intensity has been difficult to find for 48 minutes, but it was definitely there for maybe 36. Let's account for
right
quarter a little bit. But definitely in that fourth quarter, from the beginning to the end of the game, it was definitely there.
Absolutely. All righty. Going to get to some of y'all's comments here. Let me see. Cowboy Tanaka in the chat. We haven't even mentioned Victor's performance. I mean, we kind of have, but let's talk about that. And I'll get to some of the comments here. 34 points, plus 24, 3 blocks, a steal, 6 assists, 14 points, 6 for 12 from 3. 13 for 22 from the from overall, and then 2 for 2 from the line. Here's another thing I want to say. A couple of days ago, there came out, I think it was after the Jazz game, actually the one, or I say the Jazz game, not the Jazz game. Who did we play last Thursday?
Let me look.
How about
the Blazers?
Okay, there we go. That wrong back-to-back. That was 2 weeks ago. After the Blazers game, there was an NBA scout that came out, anonymous NBA scout that came out and said that Victor has no impact offensively. Saturday, today, I think he has a lot of impact offensively, Ethan.
No, he's got an insane level of impact offense. So much so, I would argue that our offense is, I mean, you can argue fortunately or unfortunately, but it is predicated on Victor Wembanyama being able to hit the 3. Because if he's not hitting his threes, we are a completely different team. And you can take that one of two ways. You can say he needs to get better at being consistent from three, or he needs to get his ass in the post and be 7'4". We can argue about that for days and days and days. What I'm saying is if he's not able to hit at least three in a game, it's going to be an L for the Spurs. Or we need Devin Vassell to go off for 40. But that's been the common theme thus far is when he's hitting his threes, we're going to be in the game and possibly win the game. But if he's not, it's not going to look pretty for the Spurs offense.
What were your thoughts on his conditioning tonight? Because one thing that I
Mhm.
even wrote down in the second quarter was that he just looked much more energized. And again, I didn't see the Jazz game, and I know he had a really good stat line there too. So I'm sure that was the case
Mm.
in that one as well. But what were your thoughts on him conditioning wise? Because that was kind of something that we noticed the last time we talked.
He definitely looked a lot better, but I will say that this is a completely different set of circumstances because he was being defended by Domantas Sabonis and not an athletic, strong wing that's pushing him off the block. And for most of these games, he is just fighting to get in the post, and they will not let him. And that's exhausting. I don't know if you've ever tried
Yeah,
to get in the post, but that is an exhausting
right,
effort. And we're not even athletes, or I'm not.
right.
I can't speak for you, but to do that
I am
every
not.
day, yeah, to do that every day, every night is really difficult. And tonight it was Domantas Sabonis, and he got off to a great start from deep. He's hitting threes. The rest of the team's hitting threes. He's really not having to work as hard as he typically does.
Yeah, that's a great point for sure. And I don't think that every team is going to play defense the way that the Kings played tonight. And another thing, again, not to take away from any of the good stuff that we saw tonight, and especially when you look at Victor's stat line, like it's not just all about the stats, but at some point you got to appreciate. Like for us at this point, even though it's only year two, Ethan, it's almost like, oh yeah, 34, 14, and 6.
Yeah,
That's normal, Victor. 3 blocks, but actually, that's completely abnormal.
yeah.
Like for a second year player. So definitely want to appreciate Victor's stat line and the incredible game he had tonight.
I think Kellyan in the comments makes a great point. It was the offensive rebounds that was probably the biggest differentiator tonight compared to the other big games from Wemby. Because usually he gets rebounds, but it's rare that we see him in there fighting for extra possessions on the offensive glass. Usually because he's either leaking out or he's the one that shot the three. But he was down there fighting with the best of them, and that best of them is Domantas Sabonis. So shout out to him for that effort.
Yeah, had 4 offensive rebounds tonight. Um, Again, there's really not much else to say about Victor. That some of the threes he hit was insane. That the spinning turnaround block that
Yeah,
he hit
nuts.
on Sabonis was insane, and just his presence overall on the boards was a big thing tonight, especially on the offensive boards, like you said as well. But I think also, like I mentioned with Mamu earlier, there was a ton of other guys that maybe the offensive board went to Victor, but
Yeah.
that a lot of that was because of the fact that there were other guys giving effort and fighting as well. So again, I know we got to see a little glimpse of it, but I'm so excited to see this team when Jeremy comes back, and that's probably that's probably like a month or so in the future. But at the same time, I'm just really excited to see him and Jeremy next to each other fighting for offensive boards, and of course next to Devin as well. I'm just excited to see this team fully healthy. It's just one game here on November 11th, but this type of performance, if we were fully healthy, it just makes me even more excited for some of the things that this team could potentially be capable of.
Remove the turnovers and give us a healthy team, and really the sky is the limit because we've seen everything else come together at least once so far.
Absolutely, absolutely. Um, John G in the comments says KJ said in an interview, I'm sure he's probably talking about, well, actually this might have been his pregame availability because I think he was on there. He said that they want to shoot more. Keldon 1 for 2 tonight, nothing crazy. But still, if other guys are hitting shots, and that was another thing I was thinking in the fourth quarter, Ethan, like if the fact that there were other people other than Victor in clutch moments being able to hit shots, like there was the Devin 3 and there was the KJ 3 as well. That
Mhm.
was something else that was kind of like different than it
Yeah,
feels like it's been watching Spurs games over the past couple years.
100%.
Blazin says the defense is going to be a monster when Jeremy comes back, and he
Mhm.
has been in his offensive bag this season too. Kellyan says, clean up the turnovers and we're in the playoffs for sure. We shall see. We shall see. We are 5-6. Got to remember, the last year the Spurs didn't get their fourth win until December 14th. Everything all good over there, brother?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
No, you're good. I'm just making sure.
Everything's fine, but this guy wants to say,
Oh my goodness.
He's being weird.
Hello. What's his name?
This is Winky.
Winky. Is Winky a Spurs fan?
Winky is a Spurs fan for sure. He watches every game.
Let's go.
Yeah, sorry for this small distraction.
No, you're totally good. I was just making sure you were okay.
He kept poking at my back and my legs, but I was like, "Do you want up here?" But he wouldn't come up here, so I was making sure.
I figured it was an animal, but I thought it was one of your dogs. That's what I was expecting.
No, not quite. He's a dog, but he's not a dog. You know what I mean?
I know exactly what you mean. He's a dog like this team was tonight.
Damn right.
Blazin says, once Devin and Julian start hitting their stroke, the spacing will be better, and we're already seeing improvements there. And just before we wrap this one up, going to go a little bit further up in the comments. I think there might have been some stuff that I missed. I think this was actually, we're finding there was one earlier, but talking about Devin Vassell, Stephon Castle and Devin Vassell, and just potentially what the lineup's going to look like with Stephon Castle, playing so well. Because a lot of people were arguing that maybe he should stay in the starting lineup. Like Steven Chan here says, I hope Castle remains in the starting lineup. Let me see. I'm trying to find another one. I feel like I missed it earlier. Castle is adapting every game and making more and more of the right reads. He'll be a great spark plug off the bench this season and a great future starter. So he was kind of talking a little bit more about his future. I thought I saw another one that was here we go. I knew I wasn't forgetting it. I'm going to be bummed if Castle moves to the bench when Devin is starting. That's a lot of juice, though, in the backcourt from Michael Hunt. So what are your thoughts on potentially or just like what the lineups are going to look like, when Devin's off his minutes restriction, and just moving forward?
Everyone's making great claims, and he's playing really, really well to warrant starting him next to Chris Paul and next to Devin Vassell at that 3 spot, especially with the way he's been shooting. However, I still think you have to bring him in off the bench, especially with Trey Jones still being injured. And when Devin Vassell moves into the starting lineup, right now he's on our bench and he's providing a lot of, versatility at that position. So we have to kind of replace him. And I'd rather do that with Stephon Castle at this point than say a Blake Wesley or a C. Sissoko. And I think that would also allow him to play more aggressively and show us the things that he's been doing in spurts, but at a more consistent basis. He'd be the primary ball handler. He'd be one of the primary scorers off the bench. So I think that would allow him to kind of blossom more so than putting him as basically the 4th option in that starting unit.
Yeah, it's tough because not just the Jazz game, but even tonight, dude. Like I feel like what I watched tonight, watching the game, is bigger than what I see on the box score from him. And obviously you still see some good things with him getting some shots up, plus 15, 6 assists, 4 boards, a steal, and a block. But his impact was felt, even further than just looking at those numbers. So I definitely see the case that people are making, and I totally get where they're coming from. I think just at the end of the day, he's probably still going to come off the bench. But I understand why y'all are bummed. But the other thing that we got to remember, too, is CP3 is on a 1-year deal.
He is.
So probably next year. Like it's not like this is going to be a very long time that Stephon Castle is going to be coming off the bench, is what I'm getting at. And dude, you mentioned Trey Jones, man. Like I forget that he's injured. Like I knew that he's injured, but when we're talking about all these guys and you see Blake making some improvements in his play, obviously Stephon is a huge story as well. And we're giving him a lot of reps at point guard. It's kind of just made me like almost forget about him a little bit. But the other thing is Malachi Branham too, who was just coming off, one of his best career games. Obviously, I think if it came down to it and you're asking me right now, yes, I'd rather play Stephon than Malachi Branham. But I'm just saying there's a lot of questions with these rotations because Stephon isn't the only one that's improved his play as of late. Obviously, I would still put him above some of the other guys that we're talking about, but I think those guys are, deserving of minutes as well. So I know this isn't really an answer, but honestly, I don't know what it's going to be. I'm not going to try to act like I do, or I could sit here and theorize, but who really knows? I'm just intrigued to see what it's going to be. Once Devin is really fully back in the starting lineup.
Well, once Jeremy's fully healthy and back in the starting lineup, then there's another question. Does Julian Champagny even get any minutes at that point, too? Because that's when you'll have Trey, Julian, Malachi all warrant playing on that bench unit. But then you have Stephon Castle, who definitely deserves meaningful play time. So one or two of those guys is not going to have any minutes later in the season.
Yeah, that's interesting to think about. Another thing I'll say about Stephon, though, is he's so versatile. He's going to be in the rotation at some spot 1 through 3, regardless.
Right. Agreed.
Keelan says, I think we move Julian in the bench instead of Castle. So that's something else that maybe you could keep him in the starting lineup and then move Devin into that spot. Cowboy Tanaka says that means we will still need the Castle D in the starting lineup. And then he also suggests, what if Sohan starts from the bench after his injury? Yeah, that's it. At least when they're easing him back in, that's definitely going to happen. That's a really good point. And here, Too Clutch Corey says, yeah, Castle is going to be a special player in just a couple of years. Completely agree. But this is the last comment I wanted to get to. John G says, all these years, I've wondered what the Spurs would do with an actual high draft lottery pick going through our development system. And man, am I excited. If you want to still have questions about Malachi Branham and you want to still have questions about Blake Wesley, even though I think, there's definitely some clear improvements that you could see this season, not like ginormous, making them a different player, but making them a more serviceable role player, in my opinion. That aside, obviously, it's just a couple games with Stephon, but I think you guys can see from the eye test, Stephon and Jeremy.
Yeah.
And really even Devin Vassell for that matter as well, when you talk about the Spurs developmental system.
Sorry, my cat's doing something crazy. But you're right. All three of them have really, well, two of them are current. Sorry, I agree with what Jude is saying.
You're totally good. Winky's distracted and he needs some attention.
Crazy on like a plastic bag, but I don't think I left a plastic bag out there. So I'm like,
he's pretending that the plastic bag is the Kings tonight.
Maybe that's what he's doing.
We appreciate you guys hanging out with us tonight. This was a great Spurs win. Very nice to be with you guys under a 20-point dub where the Spurs got a big lead in the third quarter and held on to it. That is called growth. That is called development. And me and Ethan are here for it. Eat that W, Ethan, because unfortunately, this will be our last post game of the week. Ethan and I have some stuff going on later this week, but I think your boy may be attending the Lakers in-season tournament game this Friday in San Antonio. So I am pumped for that. That was some news that kind of came out of nowhere for me. But again, we will not be back the rest of this week, but there's 2 games next week. We will definitely have some sort of content, some sort of episode out then. So if you want to stay updated with all that, turn on the notification bell or follow us on X or Twitter at SSPN on YT, at Jude McLaren, and at Ethan_Quintero. We appreciate you guys. If you enjoyed the content, don't forget to hit that like